Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Farah Gerber, and I manage the membership program here at the Island Institute. And I'd like to thank you for joining us for Coastal Maine Voices, the new virtual series we've developed for our supporters and fellow community members. So today, you're going to hear about our Maine and the unique perspectives that come from 5 fine art photographers. But before we begin, I'd like to go over a few Zoom logistics with you all. All attendees will remain on silent mode for the entire virtual event. If you have a question for our moderator or for one of our artists, go ahead and click on that Q&A button and type your question in at any time. We have a dedicated segment at the end of our event where we're going to hope to get all of your questions answered. I'd also invite you to use the chat feature. If you want to say hi or tell us where you're coming from, you can choose to chat privately or publicly. It's up to you. Just keep in mind that all questions are reserved for the Q&A button. It just helps us keep everything organized. So now that we've taken care of that, let's begin. I'd like to start by introducing Claire Donnelly. Claire is a Community Development Officer here at the Institute, and she will be our moderator for today. Take it away, Claire.
Thank you, Farah. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As Farah said, this is in celebration of Our Maine, which is Archipelago's gallery show, which is in celebration of Maine's 200th anniversary. I, as a community development officer, am the project lead for the small business team at the Island Institute, and the small business team works really closely with the Archipelago staff to support artists and makers in building resilient businesses. So I'm very excited to be moderating the panel today. We have 5 awesome photographers. As Farah said, as we're going through the panel discussion, if you're coming up with questions, enter them into the Q&A sort of throughout today so we can collate those for the end. Before we dive into the panel discussion, we're going to see a short gallery tour, virtual gallery tour video that Lisa Moselvitz made, the director of Archipelago. But before we dive into that, I'm just going to do a quick intro and a bio of the 5 photographers we have today. So we have Jim Nicholson. He's a fine art photographer, custom digital printer, teacher, and author. Before committing himself to the photographic life, he pursued the classic artistic career of NASA engineer and corporate attorney with a BS in aerospace engineering from the University of Texas at Austin and a JD from the Harvard Law School. We have Josie Iselin. She's a photographer, author, and designer who lives in San Francisco, but spends her summers on Vinyl Haven. Her writing and art focuses on seaweed, kelp, and sea otters, and her work is at the forefront of ocean activism. Sadly, this is the first year Josie will not be able to spend time in Maine since 1969. Lisa Moselvitz, who I said is the director of Archipelago, has been making images since 1995. She first picked up a Canon AE1 manual camera. And while Ansel Adams' Grand Vistas brought her to photography, her images are primarily botanical macro photographs, drawing the viewer into an intimate world of form and color. Olga Merrill is a Maine-based self-taught visual artist, primarily using the medium of photography. She was born in far east of Russia, where she lived and worked until March of 2013, when she came to Maine. And then at the end of 2015, her life changed even more when she got a camera, and her view of the world became different through its lenses. And then Terry Heyer. Prior to moving to Maine in 1981, Terry lived in Nashville, where he was an interior designer. During that time, he fell in love with photography, and for the last 18 years was able to seriously pursue photography, and his colorful images are in the hands of many private collectors. Terry Heyer died unexpectedly on January 31st of this year. So we appreciate and recognize Terry's widow, Diane, for giving us permission to share his images in the gallery. And Jim Nicholson, who is a good friend and colleague of Terry's, is going to be presenting on Terry's behalf today. So with that, let's take this virtual gallery tour.
Hello and welcome to Archipelago. My name is Lisa Moselvitz, and I'm the director of the Island Institute store and curator of the gallery. Archipelago is an economic development program of the Island Institute. Here in the gallery, we're celebrating the opening of Our Maine, a photography show sharing the works of 5 Maine photographers, Olga Merrill, Jim Nicholson, Terry Heyer, myself, and Josie Iselin. This year in Maine, we have lots to celebrate: the bicentennial, as well as Archipelago's 20th anniversary. Since 2000, we've showcased more than 1,000 Maine artists and makers in the store, in the gallery, and online, while playing a pivotal role in Rockland's emergence as a dynamic center of arts and culture. In doing so, Archipelago has become a prominent element of Maine's creative economy. Though the show has been planned for more than a year, the timing of presenting the images couldn't have been better, in my opinion. The images presented in the physical gallery, as well as online, invite the viewers into a beautiful, contemplative, inspiring, and textural places. I hope the images inspire you to slow down, observe your surroundings, wonder, and dream. The images range from macro to celestial, such a wide range of scale. Details of ice, kelp, petals, hulls capture our attention. Star trails prod us to wonder about our place in Maine and on Earth. I hope the show encourages you to think about what you enjoy about Maine, be it its coastlines, working waterfronts, or flora, and celebrate it with us this summer. You can see more online, or even better in person, on Main Street in downtown Rockland. See you soon.
Great, that was awesome. So we'll head into the panel discussion now. The first question that I have is just how Maine has inspired you to make this piece. And then, oh, there we go. So the first question will be, we'll have an image on the screen with each artist, and the question is how Maine has inspired you to make this piece, and if you can share how it connects with your sense of place and the inspiration you draw from the state of Maine. So we'll go to Jim first for this.
Well, thank you very much. For me, Maine has been such an inspiration for my work. I moved here about 13 years ago. And, of course, the main thing that has inspired me has been just the beauty of the natural world that is all around us here in Maine. And in particular for me, I became very inspired by the night sky here. I could see the Milky Way from my driveway. And that's one of the wonderful things about living here in Maine is we have more access to the night sky than pretty much anyone on the East Coast. And so this photograph is one of my pictures of basically a highly abstracted version of the night sky. It's actually a mix of star trails and star points that I've basically combined together and abstracted in different ways. Maine has also been influential to other parts of my work as well besides this. I grew up out west in Texas and in Colorado, and I started photographing the landscape in wide open vistas. And moving here to Maine, I started shooting things differently out of necessity and out of desire, more abstract, more intimate landscapes. And that really ended up changing the way I shoot. So now when I go back and visit out west again, I see things a lot differently. And now the way I shoot in Maine, I basically now shoot anywhere I go, whether it's out west in the US or Iceland or anywhere else. But really it's the night sky in particular that impacts the work that's in the show. And it's really been a big inspiration for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. That's great. Next we'll go to Josie.
Hi, I'm delighted to be here with all of you wonderful artists. It's very inspiring to see everyone's work and the show in the gallery. It's beautifully hung. My heart is there with all of you all. I'm actually here in San Francisco in my studio. This piece is the Saccharina latissima, or sugar kelp, and I have been making images of kelp and seaweed for over 10 years now. But it's the kelps and seaweeds of Maine, of Penobscot Bay, that really got me going in this direction in the first place. And this piece just brings me back to the moment when I'm either, I can't remember whether I'm lying on my dock and wrangling this big, beautiful, glorious kelp from the anchor line of the dock, or I'm in my rowboat and I'm untangling it from being hooked onto a pot buoy or a mooring buoy, and holding this golden, flouncing, three-dimensional sculptural kelp up to the sky. and just being so wowed by its color, its form, all the hydroids that are making patterns on its surface. And for me, my work is very much about bringing this world of the seaweeds and kelps to us that don't really get to see it that much. There's a whole world under our oceans, and in particular, the cold North Atlantic of the Gulf of Maine, of Penobscot Bay, that's really hidden by the lid of the tide or the surface of the water. And so, excuse me, bringing this world out to a broader audience is number one, because it's pure visual pleasure, which is my initial driver. But then that visual exploration is what takes me into the science of the seaweeds, and gets me to write about the natural history and the history of the science behind the seaweeds. So I've compiled those in a number of books, an Ocean Garden, and then my most recent book, The Curious World of Seaweed. Both this Saccharina latissima, which is actually one of the species that is most farmed in Maine, with the advent of all these kelp farms in and around Maine, they are farming this particular species, sugar kelp. And the second one we'll see, the agarum, is also native to Maine and was found on a boat trip when I actually ran out of gas. And we had to anchor while we waited for gas to be delivered to us north of North Haven. And when we finally were filled up with gas and the anchor was pulled up, what was going to be tossed overboard that came up with the anchor, I actually grabbed because it was a beautiful specimen of the agarum or colander kelp, which is what we'll see next. So these are very, very much about place and the oceans of the Penobscot Bay.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll go to Lisa next.
So this is one of the first images that I made that really resonated with me around what I saw in the field and what I actually captured in the camera. I was on a photography workshop class on Hog Island, and I was circumnavigating the island, exploring the woods, the streams, and this caught my eye. What I was really drawn to was the highlights and the backlight and the soft lightning green edges of this blue flag iris. And I love that in the contrast with the rocks and the stream. And on this bright blue sky day, the sky was reflecting in the stream as it went back into the ocean. So I was scrambling around the rocks, trying to get my tripod and everything in the right spot so I could really capture this. I wanted the leaves to be the fleur-de-lis shape, so it was really, that was my primary driver of this image. And so I ended up being in this really awkward position where my head was upside down and I was looking in the viewfinder like that and trying to capture this. And so whenever I see this image, it reminds me of sometimes I really get into strange positions to get the composition that I want. And Maine really inspires me to be immersed in nature, a lot like what Jim was saying. There's a slower pace here. I'm out and about in nature on trails or in gardens, noticing what's around me and what beauty I can find. And on this day, there was a hidden treasure on coast of Maine's island that I really enjoyed.
Thank you, Lisa. It's great. We'll go to Olga next.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This piece, Harbor Secret, I made in Rockport Harbor on 17 July 2017. The coast of Maine attracted me when I first came to Maine, and I realized that harbors and boats are the essence of Maine. After some time, I got the feelings that every harbor has its own charm and spirits. When I got a camera and started to photograph, I wanted to create artworks that will provoke or invite audience to see deeply and differently places you see often. As coast of Maine, as well as the art exhibitions in different museums in Maine, give me inspiration. One of example of influence is Night Vision, Nocturnes in American Art in Bowden. As really museum lover, I'm so happy to have nice museums around Maine. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Beautiful. And then lastly, for this question, we'll have Jim talking on behalf of Terry.
Hello again, and thank you. And it's, it's obviously bittersweet to be talking about Terry's work, but it's great to see it on the screen. It's great to see it hanging again in person on the walls of the gallery as well. And so I'm very happy to kind of speak to his work. I knew Terry for over a decade, and I was in a portfolio group with him and was a good friend. And so I know his work pretty well. He would have been annoyed that I'm getting to speak about his work instead of him, but he'll, but that's what we have now. So, what Terry's, and his relationship with Maine really came down to, he would, in terms of his photographic practice, he would go out into the world and he would just look for things, small details, these things that nobody else sees, whether it was an abandoned, junkyard or boatyard or, a flower bed or an architectural detail. He would always see these little aspects of the life around us that very few other people ever saw. And then he would capture them with his photograph. And, one thing, in terms of Maine itself, it kind of gave him that diversity of subject. He could photograph old buildings. He could photograph harbors and boatyards. He could photograph gardens. They were all around and easily accessible compared to other places in the world. And this is really how his photographic practice seemed to have developed. And he would go other places, but the vast majority of his work was based here in Maine. And, we always joked in our portfolio group that it was hard to really, that we always wanted to go see the world in his way. And, but no one really could. That's why we joked about it, because he really had a unique vision. And through capturing the photograph in the camera and what he did in the digital darkroom, kind of created his own unique vision of the world. This particular image is one of my favorites and part of one of my favorite bodies of work, because a lot of his strongest work, I thought, is work that looks like something else. And this is part of a broader project of things that kind of vaguely seemed like landscapes, but were actually, I don't know, he would always tell us, I know this is rusty metal or a boat hull or fiberglass or something else. But, and so that's the kind of work that really resonated with me of his. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. That's great. And thank you all. I just want to remind everybody watching, if you guys have questions while people are talking, feel free to enter them into the Q&A sort of as they come up so you don't lose them, and then we'll have them for when we get to the Q&A section. So the next question that I have for the panel is just really, about your process. So, what is your process and how does your relationship to Maine sort of craft the images you make? And then as far as sort of your nitty gritty technical process, it feels like everybody has a very different process here. So for this, we'll start with Josie.
Great. Well, my studio is far away from Maine, so I actually depend on the U.S. Postal Service quite heavily. This is the agarum or colander kelp that was collected from that ill-fated boat trip. And these specimens, this along with the Saccharina latissima, were actually dried either on my dock or somewhere while I'm there in Vinyl Haven, and then packaged up in such a way and shipped back here to San Francisco, where I use my flatbed scanner as a camera. And I have been using my flatbed scanner for about 25 years. It really displaced my cameras long ago. But in about 2009, I realized that I really wanted to be making portraits of these marine algae or seaweed, and that capturing their luminosity was really very, very important. So I realized I could use what's called the transparency adapter of my scanner, and it's just right here next to me in my studio. And the transparency adapter is designed to scan slides and negatives, transparencies, by pushing light through them. So I realized I could do that if I put these specimens right onto my scanner and then use that transparency adapter to push light through the specimen as the scan is being captured. That big, enormous sugar kelp had to actually be chopped into pieces so it could be shipped home. I've shipped stones home. I've shipped so many things from our coastal Maine, things that really just resonate, the rose hips of the rose rugosa, mussel shells, all of those things. I get back to my studio here in California, and there's a connection for me. There's very, very much this very coherent bond between my studio here and my home in Maine. I mean, they're attached, and it also helps that our weather here in San Francisco is very, very Maine-like. So when I come out my back door here in San Francisco, especially in our foggy summer, I breathe in the air that is Maine air. So it's something that is kind of very joyful to me. So the scanner has been my camera for a long time. And what I love about it is it lets these objects, and in this case, these seaweeds and kelp, really speak for themselves. It strips away all of this context and scale. That letting these organisms really speak to us is very important to me. And again, like I say, leads me also into the science of the seaweeds. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Josie. That's great. I love like the physical nature of shipping things. And I'm sure the Postal Service thanks you for that.
Yeah.
Next, we'll go to Jim speaking on behalf of Terry.
Hey, thank you again. Terry was a very prolific photographer. He also was not that concerned about technical details. He would just go out and photograph, and he would bring things back to his studio, his computer, and work on them there. And really what he often did was he was really aggressive with cropping, with really trying to focus in on what he found fascinating and interesting about a subject. And he would really kind of manipulate colors, he'd edit things, he would use and just try to come up with his own unique vision. Now these colors, he would not make up colors out of nothing. They were all based on what colors were originally in the object he was photographing, but he would push them in different directions and exaggerate them, kind of move differences. And so it was always grounded in reality, but really distinctly Terry. And so and it just resulted in what I think was a very cohesive and unique body of work, which was pretty rare for people who did a lot of abstract photography to kind of have a really kind of distinct vision like that. And and it's something. So he would, in terms of tying it to Maine, it was, that's what he photographed and that's what he was. And so he would photograph the wide range of subjects that are found in Maine, but stamp it with his own kind of unique and personal vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. That's great. And next we'll go to Lisa.
Thanks, Claire. So as you know, I love to explore outside, and a digital camera has enabled me to be more light and mobile and leave my tripod behind, which is very helpful when I'm trying to get down on the ground and get the right composition that I'm looking for. A big part of my creative process is to find the right mind space and place where I think that I can find beauty. So I use an intuitive process to look around. This image was made at Mary Spring Gardens here on the coast of Camden. And I use the intuitive process to look around and be aware and awake to what's around me. And I try to quiet the critic that is sometimes saying, well, why do you want to take a picture of that? And that seems like a really silly subject. And don't you have 30 pictures of that flower already? But I really just pursue that and trying to find a picture. And that's really what I'm doing. I'm finding something, I'm uncovering it, I'm discovering it. I don't work much in front of my computer. Doing post-processing or in the studio afterwards. I really try to make all the images that you see in the camera. So I often quiet my breathing. And for me, using a macro lens, the plane or depth of field is very narrow. So that's the part of the image that ends up being in focus. And sometimes with a macro lens, that's a millimeter or two. And so I end up making a lot of images trying to get that plane of focus just right. Because for me, in this image, I'm really looking at the beautiful wash of color that's in the top part of the image, the blues and greens and the different forms. And I'm watching that piece of the image to make sure that that's coming through. It's not often so much about what is in focus for me, but it's what is not what is out of focus. And to me, this looks like something that's found underwater. And I love finding other worlds with my macro lens, and Maine is just a great place to be a botanical photographer. There's a lot out and about, and I just love uncovering and discovering. So thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. I love hearing about how it's like you consider your breathing when you're taking a photograph. That's something I never would have thought of. That's awesome. Next, we'll go to Olga.
Artist process. Oh, let me say simple, please. Some of my creative process is revealed in July, August digital issue Zest Maine magazine. Welcome to know. And a few words about this piece. Fly to the Moon, I dedicated to the 50 years anniversary since Armstrong, brave American man, put his feet on the moon. It means that my process started from the idea. Armstrong's journey was discovery. So my artwork is a message that encourages people to expand boundaries, but also invite the audience to bring their imagination. About relationship with Maine. First of all, the inspiration of all seasons. I love sailing events in summer, and ice is my theme in the winter. You see the evidence in these exhibitions. Plus, Maine has such a great art community, museums, world-class galleries. It's a place where artists love to be. You can meet them. I became an artist in Maine, and I'm open for collaborations. This exhibition is nice evidence. I hope so, nice. Thanks to Island Institute, Archipelago team with Lisa, and Jim for wonderful prints, for everyone who made it happen. And let's celebrate 200 years Maine with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. I love that you make work in the wintertime. I think it's the most magical time here, and not many people are here to see it. So I think that's wonderful that it comes through in your work. And then lastly, we'll have Jim.
Okay, thank you again. I have a kind of this big dichotomy with my own work, where a lot of my work, probably half of it, I'm very much like Lisa was talking about with her work, where I'm trying to photograph the scene itself and very just trying to capture, and my photograph is very true to the scene as it existed. But I have this whole other realm where I kind of take that as a starting point and come up with my own creations that are just. And this image in particular is very representative of this type of body of work. When I go out and photograph for this sort of thing, I go out and I'm basically looking for raw materials. My pictures I'm taking on the field are these raw materials that I'm going to take back to my digital darkroom and turn into the final pieces. This project is part of the broader Harmony of the Spheres project, and it's actually in many senses a mashup between two different types of work. First, these night photographs of star trails and stars blended together with this long-term project I did for about 6 years of the full moon from different places in Maine. And so, and I basically took these two together and kind of made a surreal combination of the two. And so this is so you'll see, this is a moon coming up over the horizon. There's a false color to it. And then you have on top of that, essentially, star trails mixed together. And the other thing that makes it very representative of my new work is that it's tied to other aspects of our culture. It's tied to things like cosmology. It's tied to literature. It's tied to just how we see our place in the universe. And so my work has changed from more of a traditional landscape when I first moved to Maine to this kind of a broader and different practice. And this image is a good example of that. And, I think that, that's one thing that's fascinating about being in Maine. It's not just the location and the natural beauty, but it's all the Maine artists and all the resources we have here. The galleries Olga was talking about, photographers like the ones in the show, where I've learned and I've adapted and I've changed how I view the world. And a big part of that is being exposed to all these different things in Maine. And so it's been, my move to Maine 13 years ago has really had a massive influence on my own personal work and every other aspect of my life. And I'm happy to still be here for the next 13 and hopefully much longer. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everybody, for excellent, thoughtful answers. We're going to move now into the Q&A. So keep typing your questions into the Q&A box, everybody that's on here listening and watching. We have some great questions already. The first question is for everyone. And this is actually kind of a great piggyback off of what Jim just said about being here for 13 years and hoping to be here for 13 years more, because this is about how you keep a fresh perspective and how you keep sort of making photographs in the same place again that still feel new and different and interesting to you. So maybe we'll start with Lisa on that.
Sure. I often get asked this, and as I mentioned before, I sort of struggle with this myself. Like, I photograph lupins so much, right? Because I have a lupin field in my backyard, and I think, well, why am I going into that field again to make another picture? I have so many pictures of lupins, but I just am constantly looking at things on different angles. When I approach a flower for whatever reason, it's calling to me. I just work it. I move up and down and around and upside down and in and out, and just really try to figure out and find and create, find and discover what that image is. So I just keep at it, keep working it.
That's great. And then maybe we'll go to Jim and then Josie and then Olga.
Sure. For me, the way to keep it fresh is I basically changed myself. That's what I was talking about. And, for example, last year I worked on this project that we just saw. And in the last year, I've totally switched what I'm doing, where I'm changing what I'm doing in many ways. It's become more activist, it's climate change related, it's more straight photography again, and it has integration of text. And in doing things like integrating text or making it political, those bring in different challenges, different creative challenges, different intellectual challenges that they keep it interesting. So just, and who knows what will be next, but that's kind of why I try to keep it fresh, is by changing what I'm doing while still trying to keep a thread and a tie to my earlier work, but always be constantly evolving.
That's great. Thank you. Josie?
Yeah, so my work, similar to Jim, just the world of the science behind marine algae has taken me into a little bit of an activist bent, just purely by telling their stories. The kelp forests here in California are in pretty dire condition. So there's a lot of effort going into restoration efforts, and I really think of myself as a storyteller. So my last book, The Curious World of Seaweed, was 16 stories of 16 kelps or seaweeds. And what I'm doing now is taking a deeper dive into the bull kelp, or Nereocystis, which is the dominant kelp of the kelp forests of our Northern California coast, which is struggling mightily. But what I've been doing is I've actually been I realized moving a little bit away from my scanner, and I've been making cyanotype prints in my backyard, sun prints, basically using all of the collections of bull kelp that come home with me from my many, many beach walks. And then I've started overlaying those cyanotypes onto maps, onto historical maps, historical kelp maps. And I realize I'm also having to go pursue the nautical charts from the NOAA website. And the nautical charts are so much a familiar territory for me growing up in Maine. You rely on your nautical charts so heavily if you're a boat culture. And so being able to integrate those into these kelp imagery has been really fun. I've been doing lots of layering of these historical maps. So one of the things that's come out in my work is this playing with time and bringing these very contemporary scans or cyanotypes, combining them with historical imagery that makes this kind of vector through time. And that vector always has an arrow on it that's pointing to the future. So there's very much this underlying question in my work that is, where will these organisms be, these kelp and seaweeds be in our uncertain future? So that's kind of this ongoing kind of pursuit and drives my work.
That's great. Thank you. Olga, did you want to add anything to how you sort of keep a fresh perspective on the work you make?
The photography is abstract photography for me, just endless creativity and keep my life not boring. I life not boring life, and it's always keep interest. That's basically it is.
That's great. Thank you. There was also a question for you, Olga, sort of about how you made the ships in the harbor image. Someone said they really loved it and they would love to know how you created it. I didn't know if you wanted to share any sort of more about your technical process on that image.
Yeah, this image was fantastic actually. Evening, and it was Maine media event in Rockport Harbor. We didn't expect fog, but fog was on the harbor and give huge contributions for this image. This image, slow shutter speed with panning intentional camera movement, basically came great shots in the beginning. I added extra texture and printed for textured paper, give this painterly effect. So it's pretty much simple. It's good, good panning shots and with intentional camera movement from camera. It's 10 minutes post-process. It's kind of nothing so big process after. Just fog give huge contributions.
That's great.
Thank
Love
you.
that. Yeah, that's awesome. Let's see here. There's another question just about film versus digital. And I know sort of Josie already mentioned she has eliminated a camera entirely, so we know the answer there. Does anybody else want to talk about why they've chosen sort of one? Lisa?
Sure, I can do that.
Yeah.
I started shooting slide film, which as photographers know is very unforgiving as far as exposure and things like that. And I moved to a digital camera pretty slowly, but I did it because it allows me to change the ISO within from shot to shot if I need to, which gives me a lot of flexibility. So then I don't necessarily have to have a tripod out with me all the time. But that first image that I showed of the Blue River Iris, that's on slide film. And that was straight out of the camera.
Cool. Does anybody else want to talk about sort of their process through different mediums? Okay. Jim? Yeah, please.
I one thing to add, and for me, it was for a long time I shot digital and film together, and eventually decided I was getting better results with the digital cameras that I had. But one thing that I think is an interesting twist in all this now is that people still really resonate with those analog processes and those type of prints that come from those cameras. And one thing that I've been experimenting with, and it sounds like Josie may be doing something similar, is using modern technology to go back and create, using alternative processes, printing processes, to come up with different types of prints, but using digital photographs as the source material, like making a cyanotype and that sort of stuff. And you can, it's pretty amazing now. You can take an iPhone image and make a platinum print out of it, something that wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago. And so that's a twist for people who, that's like a nice hybrid of 19th century technology and 21st century technology that if people are interested in, is a good area to explore.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that and say I've been having a ton of fun, inspired by Anna Atkins of 1840, making these cyanotype prints in my backyard. But I digitize everything because I need the workflow of book creation and design. So that's where going straight from my scanner into InDesign or Lightroom is just such a fantastic way to work. And then I'll actually take these cyanotypes and scan them and then rebuild them in the computer. So I always love the option of being really big or small. So I love that flexibility. And I don't hold that much preciousness to the object itself. The screen, one of the great kind of bonuses of our COVID life is that everything is screen-based these days. And I realized that my work is actually, this is its native medium is the monitor. So all that luminosity, I used to give talks all over the place and I would always be at the vagaries of whatever projector, or how much light was in the room. And I can tell you, I've talked with every kind of projector, and on the screen, I know you get to see really what I've created as I created it. So that's been a nice thing.
That's great. Just my own curiosity, what's the biggest thing you've scanned? Or how big is the piece?
Well, that sugar kelp is pretty big.
Yeah, that's what I was imagining.
Yeah, it's way taller than I am. And so I drape these kelp over my scanner, and then I kind of shift them along. That I actually broke up into pieces and had to stitch back together. There's a very iconic image that has been used for many, many things of the great bull kelp that we have out here. And I kind of used to have a trampoline in my yard because my son was a big trampoline jumper. And so I could kind of spread this big kelp out in the yard and then bring it into my studio and kind of shift it along in my scanner and then stitch it together. Fortunately, glass is very impermeable. So I always have some glass cleaner right next to my scanner so I can clean it up after all that salt water gets all over it. So I've done pretty big things.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That's great.
Yeah.
Quite a process. So we've got another question from somebody here that says, sort of, how does the world change when you have a camera in your hand? So like when you're out walking around in the world, is there a difference versus when you're walking around with a camera and without? And maybe we'll start with Jim for this one and then go to Lisa and then Olga.
I'm sure, for me, usually when I go photograph, I always wish I was a person that always had a camera with me, but I'm not that person. I really have to kind of go out with that purpose, and so I like using a tripod and big cameras and that sort of thing. But for me, when I have a camera in my hand, I start seeing pictures, basically. For me, all my work is square format, so I start cropping everything square in my head that I see in the world. And it just really, you start seeing things you wouldn't otherwise see. You're looking for details, you're looking for patterns, and certainly if you're an avid photographer, you start seeing those compositions when you're not photographing too. But once I have my camera, it changes everything, and I kind of go into that zone. And then you have to be careful not to, fall over a cliff or watch for the surf because you're so focused on the camera and the pictures and everything else.
Totally. Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, I echo what Jim's saying. I think the one thing that is a little bit different for me is that because I use a really shallow depth of field, when I'm looking through my camera in the field, it can see things that I can't, the way that it blurs and layers. And the camera sees very differently than the eye, and I find that really fascinating. And that's something that I actually use my camera to see things differently than I can see when I'm out in the field with my camera.
Thank you, Lisa. Olga, did you want to add anything?
I may add that how I can see and what my imagination see, and I shoot often some pieces for post-process. So first vision, and I capture some pieces, but my imagination already working, being on a scene, see by your eye one moment, and ability to shoot it how camera can do it's different, and it's really creative moment to be able to achieve your visions just shooting or a little bit after in the post process. So that keep my interest to endless creative process.
And I don't use a camera, but I'll add that the process of looking closely is something that using a camera over all of our lives is what we're training ourselves constantly. And for me, it's being out in the world and picking up an object and having some questions come to mind immediately. You know, why is it the color it is? Why is it shaped the way it is? Why does it have this beautiful white line? You know, if it's a stone, how does this white line get formed? And that will prompt me to say, wow, this is something that's worth exploring visually by getting it onto the scanner and then going deeper. It's when I'm kind of deep in the pixels that a lot of the questions come up that then drive the research that in my earlier books would go to a scientist to write, but then as I started doing the research myself would be prompting me to go do the research. But it's always that deep dive into the looking that starts it all.
That's great. Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question. There's a great last question here for everybody that's really about your collaboration in your creative process. So do you speak, share with other photographers while you're working, or do you just really keep to yourself as an individual? Jim mentioned his portfolio group. So how do you connect with others? And for this, maybe we'll start with Jim and then, okay.
Yeah, and that portfolio group is a great way of kind of answering for Terry also, because we that portfolio group is still ongoing, but it's you know, we met for over 10 years and are still meeting, and you know, it was just a great experience. Our work was not similar to each other, but we were very compatible personality wise, and for me it was wonderful because nobody saw the work before that group. So like it had to be almost I wouldn't say vetted, but nobody saw it before them. So for me, it was great. And also having a group that met every month forced me to actually produce my new work every month to show the group. So it's something that kind of, all of us are busy and, you know, with families and jobs and lives. And so having a group like that was just a great way of kind of forcing yourself to do what you want to do anyway, you know, is create new photographic work.
That's great. And so then maybe we'll go Josie, Olga, and then Lisa.
Sure, collaboration is fantastic. I feel like I'm a designer at heart because and that's all about collaborating. I'm about, tomorrow I get to hop in my car and drive up to Fort Bragg where a group who's working on kelp restoration is doing some preliminary dives, and I'm going to take my snorkel gear and go snorkel with them in the kelp forest. And it's their information, my conversations with this young scientist who drives that project that is really inspiring some of my current work. I have another book proposal, and that's a collaboration with my editor, and getting some feedback from her on imagery and writing, and that will come back and drive how the work goes forward. I'm lucky to, here in San Francisco, there's lots of galleries and artists, and I'm going to be starting teaching in a design department, so all these young designers are going to be very inspiring to me. So it takes a lot of just getting in the studio by yourself and doing the work. And that's the life us artists are in and we enjoy, but yeah, it doesn't stop. Constant reinvention. That's the name of the game.
Thank you. It's great, Lisa. Or sorry, Olga, and then Lisa.
Collaboration is wonderful, and one week recently happens like every day I see artist, and my husband thought, what the artist of the day today? So it was painter, printmaker. We exchange inspirations and different media. Actually, I found out really useful and nice collaborations, not only with photographers. So I found it really wonderful. Right.
Great, thank you.
I think the only thing that I'll add, because what the other folks said really resonated with me as well, is that when I've been really lucky enough to take a number of workshops at the Maine photographic workshops, now Maine Media, and being in a close-knit community with other people that are pursuing their art in a learning situation, I really love that. And I love learning from everyone. I see learning as a great opportunity, and it can come from unexpected places. So I love those types of workshops to really collaborate and learn from other people.
That's great. Well, that I think is all the time we have for questions. Thank you all so much. This was great to hear from you and see a little bit of your work. So for those of you that want to see more of this work, the gallery will be hung until August 1st, and then the online gallery will be up through December 31st. And then prints can actually be ordered online and will be shipped directly to the customers. So it's a great way to get this work in your house. Thank you again to all the photographers. I'm gonna just turn it over to Farah to wrap things up.
All right, thanks, Claire. So I'd like to conclude by thanking our moderator, Claire, and our fantastic artists, Olga, Jim, Josie, and Lisa, for providing their unique perspectives on photography. I also would like to give a big shout out to Island Institute's donors. Without your donations, we wouldn't be able to help support Maine's creative economy, and we are so grateful to you. If you have any follow-up questions following this event, go ahead and email membership@islandinstitute.org, and myself, for the most appropriate person, will follow back up with you. And if you haven't already, be sure to register for our next virtual event, Island Columnists and the Dynamics of Island Life, explained by Island Insiders. All right, thanks again, guys, and hopefully I'll see you soon.